Hello, everyone. This is Katie Roper. I'm with Caring.com, and I'm happy to welcome you to our latest Digital Marketing Academy webinar, Mapping the Caregiver Journey. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. The deck that we're going through will be available within a few days. We always get a flurry of questions, can I get the deck from this? And the answer is yes, we will send it out to you. It'll come in your email, so watch for that. We generally get it out on the Monday after today's presentation. The second thing is that this is a one-way webcast. You can ask questions using the tool on the right-hand side of your screen. And just type the questions into that box, and my colleague Suzanne, who many of you know, is going to be helping me today fielding the questions. Okay, a quick word about me. Anyone who's been on these calls in the past knows me. Glitch here. This is me. I'm with Caring.com. I'm the head of sales and marketing. I've been here for 8 years. Prior to that, I was a high-tech sales sort of person. I did not have any background in senior care before coming to Caring.com. And I have to confess that I still can't get either my mom or my mother-in-law to consider either senior housing or non-family in-home care. My mother-in-law did say yes, and we actually hired a caregiver for her, and she fired her within the first 2 weeks because she wasn't doing it right. So I don't know whether you want to listen to me or not, but there you have it. Quick word about Caring.com. I'm sorry, but you do get the advertisement here. We're the #1 senior care resource site. We target the family caregivers. Those are the adult children. We get about 3 million of them every month visiting our website. They come to check out the tens of thousands of consumer reviews we have on local listings, to read the thousands of original articles we have on all different aspects of senior care, to engage with other caregivers in our support groups, and when we find people who are appropriate for our partners, we refer them out to them, and that's how we fund our operations. It's facts on these visitors to Caring.com that we'll be going through today. So that's a transition into the first overview slide for our Caregiver Journey survey. The audience for this was consumers searching online for senior care. Many of them came to the Caring.com website, but not all of them. Some of them typed in senior care specific keywords on Google, and some of them came from our partners like AARP.org or seniorhomes.com or other websites that showcase our content and refer people back to us. The survey was conducted by a third-party market research firm this summer. We got over 2,000 completes. And I'm going to share the results today in 2 parts. Part 1 is going to talk about the general demographics of the family caregiver audience, who are the ones answering our survey questions. In Part 2, we're going to look at the focus of this survey, which was the caregiver journey. And to focus on the caregiver journey, we broke our audience down into 4 different segments. Those who are living together, those where the loved one is living independently, but there is a family member involved with providing care, those where the loved one is living in a senior community, and then finally the people who are caring for themselves. So the first part of the call today is going to look at some of the general demographics on the family caregivers who answered this survey. So who are they? Well, no big surprise here to anyone involved in this industry. They're mostly female. They are mostly between the ages of 50 and 70. Our median age is around 56, and that's creeping up. It used to be around 53, but we're seeing a definite skew towards the older side of the spectrum. We think that that's because the older demographic is getting more comfortable using online resources. For the caregiving role of these people, the bulk of them are caring for a parent or in-law, that's 41%. 31% are caring for a spouse, 10% are caring for a friend or other relative, and 18% are self-caregivers. You can see below the illnesses and conditions of the care receiver, so not the caregiver, but the person who is getting cared for. Those care receivers are mostly over the age of 80, which makes sense given that the care receiver is, or the caregiver is in her 50s and 60s. And you can see the list of conditions there. My big takeaway from this is don't get old. Okay. In terms of what they do to help their loved ones, you can see here the list of the top activities. We asked about some other things, but these were the big ones. Again, no big surprise. Grocery shopping and errands and attending medical appointments were the biggest ones. Managing finances and paying bills close behind, and then a whole list of other things. What was interesting to me is that the traditional activities of daily living that everybody talks about was actually a much smaller percentage of the tasks that people were doing than some of these things that you may not think about, like administering and tracking medications and managing finances. And again, you're welcome to take a screenshot of this data, but we will be sending it out to you later on. So those are a lot of tasks, and as you can see here, it actually takes people a lot of time to deal with them. 39% of the people who answered our survey are spending more than 30 hours a week with caregiving tasks, and another 13% are spending 21 to 30 hours a week. These numbers are actually even higher for the Alzheimer's segment, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. We asked caregivers about how their caregiving tasks were affecting their employment. 35% of those caring for others continue to work, with 20% working full-time. And 71% of them say that caregiving has negatively impacted their work situation. That is up significantly from prior years' responses. Of the 71%, in terms of how they were impacted, 65% reported being distracted, 55% had to change their work schedule to accommodate caregiving tasks, and 19% missed significant amounts of work to perform their caregiving tasks. I will tell you that at caring.com we consistently see a huge traffic spike on Monday mornings. People come into work after a weekend of caregiving and immediately hit their computers to look up whatever the thing was that popped up on Sunday when they went to visit mom. Caregiving and money was another big segment of the questions. One stat that has gotten a lot of pickup in the press is that half of all caregivers spend more than $5,000 out of their own pockets on caregiving expenses. So these are the adult children spending $5,000 or more in a year to assist their elderly loved ones. Now, anyone who is running a senior care community or an in-home care agency knows that $5,000 a year is a teeny drop in the bucket compared to the cost of providing professional care for someone who really needs it. But if you're not in the industry, that's a pretty shocking number, since most of us don't have $5,000 just sitting around waiting to do things with. Another very interesting stat on caregiving and money is that caregivers of Alzheimer's patients are 3 times more likely than other caregivers to be spending more than $50,000 annually on care. That, of course, is the cost of a memory care community. 11% of those whose loved ones have Alzheimer's are spending $50,000 or more versus 4% of those who are not dealing with a dementia situation. So those are pretty shocking numbers. Another very troubling stat on the caregiving and money side is how few of these caregivers have done any sort of planning for their own period of getting older. Almost half have done no estate planning, and that number is not different for those spending $50,000 a year or more. So you can't even say, well, they have nothing left. Now, you know, maybe if you're spending $50,000 or more a year, you realize that you're not going to have anything left, so why bother estate planning? But it's still a pretty significant number. Only 20% have long-term care insurance, another frightening number for anyone who knows how important that is as an option to pay for care that you would need as you get older. Clearly a big opportunity to engage with people in this phase of life by providing education about financial issues. And for anyone who's working on a blog or wants to do content marketing or is thinking about any other ways to reach out to people, this is clearly a place where they need education and might be a great way to start a conversation with people who eventually need your services. So let's see, caregiving and Alzheimer's. This was a split that we did looking at the data specifically for people who reported their loved one had Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. That was 63% of the total caregiving audience, a frightening number. As I mentioned before, they're 33% more likely to be the high-hour caregivers. 42% of those with caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia were providing care for more than 30 hours a week versus 31% of those whose loved one did not have dementia issues. They're 20% more likely to be negatively impacted at work. 75% of all Alzheimer's caregivers reported that their work situation was negatively impacted by caregiving duties. And this last one really sort of breaks my heart. When we ask non-dementia caregivers, almost half of them, 49%, agree that families should take care of each other no matter what. When we ask Alzheimer's caregivers that same question, that drops to only 37%. A friend of mine, when I shared the stat with her, said, well, yeah, it's like if your baby has colic, you're way more likely to hire a babysitter versus the person whose child doesn't have colic who will say, well, I would never let a third party take care of my baby. So, you know, clearly Alzheimer's caregivers are deeply into things. We did a lot more talking and investigating of Alzheimer's caregivers. If you're interested in this, you can go to our website, caring.com, click on the newsroom, and you'll find there our press release on more findings on caregiving and Alzheimer's. Okay, now we're moving into part 2, looking at the segments, the 4 segments of the caregiver journey. This is what I mentioned before. We split our audience into 4 different segments and asked them slightly different questions. Obviously, the issues are different in each of these cases. The language is different. So once you had answered the general questions on general demographics and caregiving tasks that we went through before, we split you into different tracks on the survey and asked you some different questions. So of the people who answered the survey, 50% were living together, 20% had a loved one living in a community, 8% had a loved one living in his or her home, and 18% were caring for themselves. We'll talk about each of these groups. I'll start with the segment of people who live together. This is the largest segment of the people who answered. 60% of those who are caring for others, so not the 18% caring for themselves, but the rest of the population caring for others, 60% live together. And of that 60% are spouses, but 40% are non-spouses. If you look at spousal caregivers separately, they're more likely to be male. Men take care of their wives, but they don't take care of their moms. So mothers of boys on this call, you've got some work to do. They are much more likely to be caring for someone with Alzheimer's. So again, we hear lots about how Alzheimer's is more prevalent in women than in men. We're seeing that in the data here as well. 31% of spousal caregivers have a loved one with Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, versus 26% of non-dementia caregivers. And spousal caregivers are more likely to be retired. This is likely just due to age. If your spouse is on the older side of things, meaning more likely to need care, you're more likely to be on the older side of things and consequently more likely to be retired. One thing that surprised us all here was what a long-term commitment it is when a loved one moves in with you. So here's the split. 66% of those living together had been living together before the loved one needed care. That includes 15% of the non-spousal caregivers. So there is a significant chunk of people who had their loved ones living with them even though they're not spousal caregiving. Those are the multi-generational families. Of the 34% who were not living together, 21% moved their loved one into their own home, and 13% moved themselves into their loved one's home. There was no statistically significant difference in the answers of the people in those two buckets. In terms of what prompted the move, they could select more than one, but over 60% of people cited a medical condition as a prompt to change the living situation. 21% cited death of a spouse. Remember that number because it'll come up again when we talk about people in communities, and it's pretty interesting. 20% financial considerations, and then of course just general. The other thing that was very surprising is living together is a long-term thing. Half of non-spousal caregivers had lived together for more than 3 years, and only 10% of the people who moved into a facility did so moving from a family member's home. So once you move in with your adult daughter, you're staying with her. We asked how they cope. What are they doing to get through all of those hours of caregiving? 27% employ paid caregiving assistants in the home. That's not all professional agencies. There's a lot of the next door neighbors, nannies, mother type people, or individuals they find on Craigslist. But almost a third, even though they're living in the loved one's home, do employ some additional paid caregiving assistance. Surprisingly few use adult day services. I don't know if this is just that people don't know that these exist. And only 10% use government assistance programs. This is a troubling stat for me because I know that there are great programs out there, but people don't know about them and they're not using them. 30% use no outside services at all to get through their day. That's a big marketing opportunity for the home care people on this call. In terms of their attitudes about their living situation, the good news is, since this goes on for a long time, 50% of people are satisfied or very satisfied. 40% agree this is that families should take care of each other no matter what statement. So 40% of them feel that this is just an obligation and it's not really a question. Here's another marketing opportunity. 35% of people agree that their loved one's care needs are increasing to the point where they think they'll need to make a change soon. But 30% think that their financial situation does not allow for any other arrangement. Again, great marketing openings here to talk to them about how you can help given the increase in care needs, but the concern about financials. Okay, now I'm going to move into segment number 2. These are the people whose loved ones are living independently in their own homes. This was about 15% of the population who were caring for others. Again, we asked how do they cope. Here you can see just a huge number pay for in-home caregiving help. Almost 50% of people in this situation use paid caregiving in the home. This is also the PERS people. 29% used a personal emergency response system in this situation. But again, very little use of government programs, and also very little use of volunteer services like a Meals on Wheels type program. In terms of attitudes, here, this was the least satisfied segment in all of our survey. They were only half as satisfied with the living situation as people living either together or with a loved one in a community. But when we ask them why they don't change, almost half of them say, my loved one would never consider moving. So those are the people who need some help with messaging this to the older person. Again, remember, we're talking to the family caregivers, so these are primarily the adult daughters. 22% think that it's due to financial constraints. But interestingly, just about the same percentage, 38% compared to 35%, feel that their loved ones' needs are changing and they're going to need to make a change in the living situation soon. And that tees us up well for segment number 3. These are the people who are living in a senior care facility. 24% of those who were caring for others and answered our survey questions. Here you can see what I mentioned before. 74% of the people who are currently living in a community were living in his or her own home before the move. Only 10% were living with their adult child or another relative. 16% actually moved from a different community into the one that they're living in now. The open ends talked a lot about being poorly cared for. There were some mentions of workers stealing from people. We didn't realize that that number was going to be as big, so we didn't go into a lot more details about why they moved and what triggered the move. So unfortunately, I can't answer any more questions there. We thought that it was really interesting. How long they've been living in the community, you can see here that significant numbers of them, over half, have been living there for more than a year, and 20% more than 3 years. So they're again in there for the duration. And this segment was the happiest in our survey, again with just over 50% being satisfied or very satisfied with the living situation. And this is interesting because, of course, the adult daughters are always racked with guilt over how could I move mom into a care facility, and yet they're much happier when she moves in versus when she was living on her own. We asked them what prompted the move. And medical condition, again, was overwhelmingly the largest, the most common reason that people moved into a community, with caregivers' needs just shortly after that. Again, remember, we're talking to the adult daughter, so this is not asking the senior why they decided. This is asking the adult daughter why she decided to encourage her loved one to move. Death of a spouse is only 10% here, and loneliness is only 8%. You can select other things, so these are not mutually exclusive. But most senior care marketing is about the lifestyle issues. Move in and we'll have all these activities, and your loved one will have all the socialization. That's not really the driver for the family caregiver audience. It's much more likely to be either a medical condition or the family member's own needs. I've talked to a number of people about this survey since we announced these results, and some interesting points have been brought up. Well, maybe it's that the industry is not doing a good job of marketing the lifestyle benefits of a community, so nobody knows about them, and the only reason they would ever move is if they have to. I think that's a very reasonable explanation. Unfortunately, I don't have any other information here to add to that, but I think it's very interesting and especially dramatic when you compare the 20% of the people who moved in with their adult children did so on the death of a spouse. So interesting thought. We also asked how did they select the community when they made the decision. And of course, in-person tours is the biggest reason that they would pick one community over another. Interestingly, only 40% of people said that they had prior local knowledge of senior housing options in their area. That means 60% of people don't have any idea of the communities in their area when they first start down this phase of the caregiving journey. Well, if they don't have personal knowledge, how do they find out? Obviously, just over a third of them relied on recommendations from family members or friends, but almost 30% of them went online, looked at directories like caring.com, read the reviews. Slightly fewer looked at the community's own website. Now, you do have to take these numbers with a little bit of a grain of salt because basically everybody answering the questions in this survey searched online for senior care, and a huge percentage of them did actually use an online directory such as caring.com because that's how we got their name. So that you can't 100% trust these, but it is interesting to think that when you ask people what impacted their decision, online options, both third-party directories like Caring and the community's website, were significantly more impactful than recommendations from medical or senior care professionals or clergy members. Everyone loves those professional referrals because they convert so well, but unfortunately only about 17% of people rely on this as a source of information. So, again, if it's working for you, great, but if you're not full with a wait list, you might want to start thinking about some of these other options. 8% of people said, my loved one knew this facility and selected it him or herself. Again, we're talking to the adult children, so by definition, everybody in our survey is in a situation where the older person needs care. This isn't the CCRC living independently, completely self-sufficient person. This is the people whose adult children are involved, but still I thought it was interesting that only 8% of people said that it was up to their loved one. Here's another interesting stat. How long did the decision take? 31% had immediate need, moved in right away. Everyone says internet leads don't convert or they convert too long. Not according to this, because we had 66%, 2/3 of people moved in 6 months after they started making the decision. This is not after they toured. This is after they started thinking about moving their loved one into a community. Another very interesting thing is the other end of the spectrum. 12% took 1 to 3 years and 5% took more than 3 years. That's a total of 17% taking more than a year to make their decision. This speaks to the need for ongoing nurturing. There's been a lot of conversation recently in the industry about this. This is content marketing. This is having a blog. This is having an email newsletter. It's working with a company like caring.com that does email nurturing on behalf of our partners. But you need to stay in touch with these people because while 2/3 of them move in less than 6 months, there's another third that are still making that decision more than 3 years later. Okay, the fourth segment, the caring for self segment. Most of these people live in their own homes with no assistance. Very few of them employ paid caregivers. So home care people, you know, here's an opportunity for you. And this was the least satisfied group. Only 29%, or no, I'm sorry, the living independently people were the least satisfied. These people are only slightly more satisfied. There's a lot of interest here in moving into a senior community. 20% of them are worried about their own health and safety, but also 20% of them think they have no other choice, whether for financial reasons or other reasons, than to live on their own. So even though they're not happy, they feel stuck. Here's another cut at this data looking at people who live in their own home versus those who live with their adult children versus those who are caring for self. The people who are caring for themselves are stuck due to finances, stuck due to attitude, or looking for a change due to health and safety, looking for a change because they can't continue. Again, the people living together seem to be in pretty good shape here compared to the other ones. So in conclusion, again, these were some of the things that I had thought about. There's obviously a lot more that you could pull out of this data. Marketing takeaways if you have an in-home care agency. There's significant usage of paid assistance by family members with an elderly loved one, but very little among people caring for themselves. That to me says that there's an opportunity to step in there and talk to particularly those caring for themselves people who we know are concerned for their own health and safety. The other thing I would say is that much of the paid assistance is non-professional. So these are, you know, one step up from a babysitter, and I think there's an opening to communicate the benefits that a professional agency can bring versus the person you hire off of Craigslist. Another thing is this very low usage of government or community volunteer programs. There's possibly a way to differentiate your agency by helping people find these programs in their communities. Now, it might seem counterintuitive because, well, if they're using Meals on Wheels, then they don't need a paid caregiver to come in and cook for them. But again, it's a great way to engage with people and start a conversation and kind of introduce yourselves, and a way to differentiate your agency versus the other ones out there. For those on the call marketing senior communities, it's really important to keep in mind that we have two distinct audiences here, the older adult and the family caregiver. They have very different concerns, very different needs. You really kind of need two different marketing messages to talk to them. The family caregivers are not resonating with the lifestyle marketing, the socialization marketing. All of this doesn't really move the needle. Their concerns are health, safety, and medical care. Is that because of a lack of awareness? Could be. It's an interesting hypothesis, but it's also something to keep in mind as you're talking to these people. There are also a lot of points of resistance that open the door for you to be a valued partner in this caregiving journey. Whether you're helping people unstick their family members due to attitudes or due to finances, you can step in there and educate them on the different options available to them. Don't ignore the online ecosystem. While professional offline referrals are still a big part of most people's businesses, their impact on decisions is getting smaller and smaller. 60% of the people who took our survey reported no knowledge of local communities in their area. They're relying on the internet to find out. And of course, no big surprise, tours have a huge impact. If you're going to be at the SMASH Summit next week in Chicago, come and listen in on our tours panel. It's going to be really fun. I've got a great bunch of people, and I'll be presenting some more data on the impact of tours. Okay, with that, I'm going to put you all on speakerphone here, and Suzanne is going to help me with the questions that people have been asking. Okay?
Okay, Katie. Question on the floor.
I think you can probably drag that down. Let's see here. So some of these are going to be a little bit hard to answer because we should have taken them during the presentation. I apologize.
Okay. If mom or dad refuse to leave home, Katie, how do we offer a solution for a family?
So I'm assuming that this is a senior community question, and you know, this is why people pay high-priced consultants a lot of money, is to come up with the answer to that. One thing that I'll say, you know, I've sold lots of different things for a lot of years, and while everybody talks about wanting the benefits to their loved one, what they really care about, as we saw from the data, is the benefits to themselves. So, you know, sharing this stat that people whose loved ones live in a community are twice as happy as those whose loved ones are living independently. So, adult daughters, this isn't the end of your life. This isn't a decision that's going to rack you with guilt. This is something that's going to be a huge weight off your shoulders. I also, I'm a big believer in the value of telling stories, and telling stories about happy people, well cared for people, people who went from, you know, having, I know a lot of stories of people who are not doing well at all, and they move into a senior community, and within weeks they're more alert, their dementia has lessened, they're happier, they're, you know, a lot of medical conditions are going away because they're getting real exercise. There's a lot of benefits, and we just need to get better at communicating them.
Good. Okay, got another question for you, Katie. You had mentioned, you were talking about the negative impact of employers understanding the caregiver role. So the question on the table was the negative impact of the employer not understanding the caregiver role the truth, or was it their own perception?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. This is all perception. We did not ask them where they worked and call up their employer and say, so what are you doing for all these people in your teams? Again, as somebody with employees, you know, part of the art of management is creating an environment where people feel okay about sharing what's going on with them and sharing the challenges they're facing and letting you know and being open. So I think that kind of flips around on those of us who are managers and says, you know, it almost doesn't matter what we're doing. If people feel that we're not supportive, then we're not being supportive and we need to change.
Here's one I don't know if you would know, but I thought it was a good question. What is the percentage of the population that can afford a memory care community?
You know, I don't know that offhand. It's mostly those people spending upwards of 50 grand. I mean, certainly in big cities, memory care can run you 3 times that. It's a serious problem for society, and I wish I had a better answer for you. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. We will be sending out the slides, so you'll have all of these data points at your fingertips. Before we wrap up today, I did want to put in a plug for our next webcast. This is Ask Me Anything Family Advisor Edition. So if you are a client of Caring.com, or if you've been concerned about how well do our people actually screen the families, as you know, we don't send anybody now who we haven't talked to, and that generates a lot of questions. Well, what are you saying to these people, and what do they say to you, and what do you do to help us out here? If you have any questions you've been dying to ask, join our webinar next month, and we'll have real live family advisors with me taking questions from the audience, so it should be a good one. And of course, as always, we'd love to earn your business, so if you're not working with us already, here's the contact information for Vishal, who manages our sales team, and for me, if you have questions about webinars or Caring.com, or if you know of good restaurants in Chicago for next week, let me know. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in November.